Well, hello. I'm Larry Flick,
I'm Gabe Scherzer.
and this is the comment section, the best part of life out in this technological ether called the internet. What are the kids calling it these days? You're a kid, Gabe. What do you call it?
Online books.
Anyway,
It's all for education, you know.
it's all for education, especially the all the naked bodies. But anyway,
So
we
Larry, we actually today's a very special day, isn't it?
today's a very special day because we have our first ever guest on the show, and it's a fella that I met earlier this year through a Facebook group called the Volumaniacs, a very musically devout group of men and women, and Max Davallo, who's joining us, has a podcast that if you haven't checked out yet, you absolutely must. It's called Sonic Dorms. And there's also a video version that you can see on YouTube, and you can get it wherever you listen to podcasts. It's a great conversation to be heard. And it's about our topic today, which is rock. But first, let's say hello to young Max. I'm like the old dude here. Hello, Max.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
So how long have you been doing Sonic Dorms?
I started it shortly after, a couple months after COVID had begun. It was a passion project that I had in mind probably for about 7 to 10 years. I got into film. I was in film school, but I always had this love for music, this passion for music that was almost like a first love. And I wanted to get into broadcasting, but the film thing kind of took that aside for a little bit. Once COVID hit, I decided to take the plunge into what I felt really was my first passion. And here we are today. It's been 2 years in, grassroots. And I just want to create another filter for people to realize how beautiful the power of music can be. I don't want to sound pretentious, but I feel like we don't have enough filters for musicians to really talk about what they do, especially the independent artists. Mm-hmm. We used to have tastemakers back in the day, radio DJs such as Larry Flick at a Billboard, and these journalists that would curate and say, this is what you should be listening to right now. I have great taste. Check this out. And I'm not saying that we should all think we have great taste, but we should showcase the music that we're passionate for in such a way that we talk about it and invite people on to showcase that. And to me, I felt a deep desire to do just that in a modern way, I guess, which is the podcast platform, the internet, the online platform. So here I am just trying to work my way up as life goes on.
It's the right way to do it, as I've mentioned to you, in our private conversations, that if you have something to say, don't wait to be asked, just say it. Everyone's waiting for a hand up or a hand out, and our industry doesn't work that way. You just have to demand to be heard. It's so technologically easy to do now. So sing out Louise, as they used to say back in the day, right, Gabe?
Sure. Why not?
He's like, I've never heard that term before. It happens a lot here, Max, where I dust off some old references. I might even sing, so get ready for that.
But yeah, Max raises a really interesting point, which is something, Larry, you and I have talked about, and we'll probably devote a whole other episode to, and maybe Max, you'll come back for that one, is about this being a purveyor of music, why do we care? And what makes us care, and why is it so important to share that information? So you might have to come back for that episode as well.
I think so because there used to be a very tall, sturdy gate that would keep people who had interesting views to climb over in order to share them. I know that because I had to climb over that gate. But I can tell you that there are a lot of people, and I've learned this through many, many years and talking to many people like the two of you. There are folks who just have a lot of interesting things to say, and the world doesn't require that gate climb anymore. So, yeah, let it be heard. But we're attempting a very tricky topic today. And the reason why I was very strong about inviting Max to join us, Gabe, for this one, is because it's broad, and I think what people will discover as the three of us chip in is that you're going to hear three very different points of view on a very seemingly simple question, which is, what is rock? In 2022, what is rock music? So I think what I'd love to do, if I may grab the reins for a couple of seconds, Mr. Gabriel, is ask one simple question that we'll all answer in one sentence. What is rock? We'll start with you, Max.
Rock to me is a spirit. That is captured. It's evolved over the decades, but to me, it's always been about pissing your parents off. It's always been about recklessness, being carefree, being wild. Obviously, going back into the 50s, it pertained to a certain type of music, guitars, bass, drums, that carried on for a while. But that to me is the essence of rock. To me, if you want to just go from the basic standpoint.
Gabe?
Yeah, I think similarly, excuse me, I think that rock is an attitude, like Max is saying, more so than a genre. And I think that, when we get into it, we'll talk a little bit more about that, because the definition has as you said, Larry, has broadened over time, particularly when you look at things like the Rock Hall of Fame and accolades like that. But yeah, rock is an attitude, and I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, for me, it's all of those things, but first it has to come from a tribal expression, whether it be one person banging a drum or a group of people coming together to make a certain kind of noise. What you all do when you come together is where things get kind of tricky, in my point of view. But it has to come from a very communal, tribalistic communion. And I think the fact that there are so many layers and elements of rock music is where things get tricky, but it's also where so many different sectors and subcultures have fought to appropriate the word. And from my point of view, and I can't wait to hear everybody else talk about this, I used to do a segment on a show on Sirius XM. The show was called Feedback. It was on a music station called Volume, and I would bring in new music every Friday, and I would get criticized if I didn't play rock music. And I would say, I just played 10 songs and 9 of them are rock. But you're not playing rock music. And I would say, what are you talking about? And what they were really saying is they wanted metal music. And the metal community has appropriated the word rock in the last few years. And it's a very interesting conundrum that's going on here. We're on a Zoom right now, y'all listening, and Max just started nodding profusely and grinning. So what were you thinking as I said that?
That's how I was introduced to your fantastic work, Larry. On you would have the flick of the week every Friday on Feedback, and I would always want to argue back, but of course I'm not one to start fights. But I never really understood the whole we want you to play rock thing, because to me, rock is a broad term, and to me, you would throw in your fair share of it was very open, is very eclectic, And to me, you always cater to almost every niche every Friday in the best possible way. So I myself would be a little confused and be wild about what people were trying to get at. But then I got it. And to me, that was always something that I myself would have to rile against, because I never personally understood the appropriation in the rock genre, if you will. But it's something that, to me, it's like they're dead set on it. It's not, to me, it's not really an argument worth having at the end of the day when it comes to trying to fight that back. I just go, well, this is what it is, you know.
So when I was telling that story, and I think, Gabe, I've told you that story before in our private conversations, what do you think about that? What do you think about the whole metal appropriation of the word rock?
I think that rock is something that people love to claim as their own, but the reality is that it's just, depending on who, where, when you are, it is so varied. I mean, for the longest time, despite incredible influences from the Black community, I think that white communities all over wanted to claim it as their own and sort of said, this is, that's not rock, that's Black music. This is rock is white music. I think that for a long time, there was a disconnect there. And then I think that once more subgenres of rock started coming about, it started to get tricky, because people wanted to say, this is the real rock, that's its own thing. That's country. That's R&B, that's blues. That's not rock. But at the end of the day, I mean, the whole reason why we're having this conversation is because of how broad and how niche specific the term is. I mean, if you look at Rock Hall of Fame inductees, there's not one thing that binds all of the people, it's all about the attitude, which is why that's what I come back to.
But Gabe, don't you think that because what you just said, like, made a lot of different bells ring in my head. And one is, don't you think that the battle comes down to things that have nothing to do with music?
Absolutely.
Don't you think it comes down to, I don't want Black people at my show. I don't want gay people at my show. I don't know if I want women at my show. I don't know. I don't know if I want, I don't know if I want anything other than a very specific, very narrow sector of people.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think that it's largely about ego. I think that it's largely wanting to feel like your sensibilities are the right one, and that somehow other people, it's almost political in a way. It's almost like, dying on a hill of this is what rock is, and I will fight anyone about it. It's wanting to feel like your perception of this culture is the only right one. And it has, it led to a lot of division. Like that's why I brought up it's almost political, because people do almost treat it that way. And because of that, people have such vastly different relations to it. But yeah, I do think that to a large degree, it's wanting to remain insular and wanting to remain comfortable.
It's funny, because as soon as you said politics, I was like, this man is 100% right. Because when I would hear the arguments about rock on the Feedback Show on Volume on Sirius XM, it started to feel very Republican to me, because there is this whole middle America kind of attachment to that kind of music. I'm not saying that that's how all the people who love that music feel, but there is very much a conservatism, and I don't know if the conservatism is political or if it's mirroring politics by shutting the others out, which is what conservatism ultimately does. Don't you think, Max?
Yeah, I personally can't stand the closed-mindedness. To me, I'm almost appalled by it. I think that, and for me, as someone who's always been adventurous with my taste, and I to me, more is better. To me, the more influence you gain from no matter what it is that you eat, listen to, watch. To me, the more educated you can be. To me, the better the experience is. To me, to have all these subgenres of said rock music and to take a little bit of everything and make something of your own out of it or your own perception on it, to me only enhances the so-called rock experience.
So something also started to ring in my brain as you were talking, Gabe, and I want to hear what you think. The seeming infighting among fans of rock music seems to come down between metal and punk in quotes, right? Because metal is anti-establishment, but it's also a dominating force, whereas punk is a let's tear up the establishment, let's tear everything apart, let's not worry about it all, let's knock the man down. What do you think when I say that?
I think that you're right. I think that rock and roll fans, however you would define that, there is one thing that binds them in that they are all looking for ways to express or to feel like this is what I've been trying to say. This is what I've been thinking. This is why X, Y, and Z is wrong. And I think that within I think that within these different subgenres, that's where it gets nuanced, because there's a little bit of rebellion, whether that be, against the government, against the world, against hate. If you're the Beatles, or if you're one of these other more quote unquote like softer rock bands that I would probably relate closer to, there's that sort of yearning towards speaking out. And I think that's really why people are so passionate, because it's like, no, this is the right way to do it. This is the right way to do it. And the truth is that there is no right way to do it. It's good that everyone is so passionate about it, because it's what keeps the genre alive. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that it's different sides of the same coin.
But Max, do you think that if just to stay with the metal versus punk thing for a second longer, do you think that if they actually listen to one another, they would see that they actually agree on a lot more than they realize? Because if you talk to a metalhead, they'll say punk is bullshit, and if you talk to a punk person, they'll say that metal is the man, is the establishment. So, but they kind of, aren't they both rebels in a different in just different guitar riffs?
Yeah, they're all part of the same tribe, really, and I think that if they actually sat down in a room, they would actually become best friends overnight. It's just a matter of as far as like the music itself, that's something else. But as far as what they're fighting for, what they're standing up for, it's really the same thing, isn't it?
I always found it really interesting in the early days of Metallica, where they would cover Misfits songs, and Misfits were one of the great punk bands in history. And how the diehards didn't know that. They were just like, this is a crazy song. Not knowing that if they just went and listened to the original version of Last Caress, they would be blown away by both versions because both versions bring out a different nuance of the song, but one thing that you have to learn about the comment section, young Maxwell, is that all things lead to one person. We're going to dub him today the patron saint of the comment section, and that person is John Mayer. So, Gabe, where does an artist where does an artist like John Mayer fit in this landscape that we've been talking about so far?
Well,
because there are people who would say there are people who would say he's not a rock artist.
Yeah, and I think they're
morons.
The way he fits in is John takes. I see you already laughing at me, and I don't want to have any of this. I know where your mind is going, Larry. And if you bring up that song, then it's going to be a problem.
Do you know this? Do you know his biggest hit, Max?
Oh,
first single. It was the first single, or is it Your Body's a Wonderland?
Your Body's a Wonderland. So
right.
Now you have a deep voice. I have a higher voice. If we sing it together,
we
might hit a harmony that would send young Gabriel into either hell or ecstasy. So your body is a wonderland. Let's try it one more time. 1, 2, 3. Your body is a wonderland.
All right, I'm gonna.
I'm just gonna head official now.
I'm gonna head out.
Just for you, Larry.
You got good tone,
Max. We were getting along so well, man.
No, now you're gonna be a permanent fixture on this show. That was called your audition to become a recurring character, and you passed.
Oh, thank you.
So
for nobody else, Larry. For nobody else.
So, but all things aside, there are people who would mock the idea. There are people in the rock world who would call John Mayer a pussy.
Yeah, and I think that that's stupid. I think that he is one of the greatest guitarists in the world. I think that he is an absolutely great bridge between the sort of the older blues and the new wave of blues. I think he's an incredible songwriter. I think that people get caught up because he does have this persona, and his audience is not necessarily who you might associate with rock, but rock and roll is continuing the path of the people who started it, right? It's taking influence and trying to express it in your own way and in your unique way, and being unapologetic about it. And if John isn't that, then I think that it's wrong to say that he's not. Yeah, I think I understand where people are coming from because he's on the softer side of.
But you know what? I'm going to jump in here and say I don't see where they're coming from. All jokes about John Mayer aside, John Mayer is a brilliant guitarist. He is a great rock artist. To say he's not rock is to say Fleetwood Mac, who I bring up at least once a show, are not rock. It's the same as saying Coldplay are not a rock act.
Right, or
they're
Neil
a rock
Young.
act.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I think that there are, and it's funny because I was in a conversation with someone not too long ago, and the question was, and I'll ask both of you, if Bruce Springsteen was signed today, would he be sold as a rock act? Max?
Great question.
He might be dubbed Americana or country, even folk, everything but rock. that's why there's some parallels between him and Taylor Swift at times, as far as like there are these singer-songwriter types who aren't just driving the straight lane of what people perceive as rock to be, but it really is. I mean, at the end of the day, but as far as being signed today, yeah, I don't see him being dubbed a rock act, even though he clearly is.
I mean, it's insane, Gabe, if you think about it, because if you've even just seen clips of Springsteen perform, I've been to see him perform live. There's no greater rock artist to ever walk the stage.
Mm-hmm.
I'll fight anyone who disagrees with me on that one. There's no greater rock artist to walk on the stage. Because he epitomizes all the things that you said, that both of you said at the very beginning of this conversation. He's the attitude, it's the tribalism, it's the purity of it all. So where does all this lead? If it is there any chance of the idea of rock music getting what is there any chance of it getting watered down as it becomes so diverse?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a lot of things that have made it have watered it down. I think the biggest culprit, though, is accessibility to music and quantity. I think it's very hard to stand out nowadays as a rock band or as a rock artist, because it's not the dominant genre anymore, and because there are a few bands that so heavily control those top spots that it's harder to break through, and it's harder to find an audience. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Larry?
I agree with what you're saying, because I think yeah, it's competitive in a different kind of way now. I also think, though, that with so much infighting among the artists, or I should say among the fans, this is actually not the artists. The artists are all happily to just go out there and just play. But with so much infighting among the fans, I think that's ultimately the bullet that we all need to dodge. Because I think one of you said it. We're all in it for the same reasons. And to go back to the 50s, as Max brought up earlier, it was an expression that was meant to be different from the Pat Boones and the Bobby Vintons and all those those kind of croony boy singers of the day. It was meant to be rebellious. It was meant to piss off your parents. It was weird, though. Can I ask you both? Do both of you? Because my parents introduced me to rock music, because my parents got married when they were young and they had me when they were young. So it was very weird. I didn't have the rock rebellion moment that a lot of kids have had. My father played Jimi Hendrix for me. He owned all those records. He was supposed to go to Woodstock. He was like a real rock dude. Do either of you come from families where they were like, turn that noise down?
Can I chime in first?
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say I also primarily the beginnings of this started with my dad and his music collection, and my dad had a very big spot in his catalog for rock music. Very eclectic, but there was rock music there. My mom, on the other hand, wasn't really into music that much, and so if I was going to be blasting, because I'm a weird guy, I would be blasting some Adam Ant or some whatever my ears were gravitating towards at the time. It was like, whoa, you can turn that down a little bit. But when it came to pissing off my dad at the time, I always would check out whatever. This is me at like 7 years old, 8 years old. I was checking out what was going on in MTV, VH1 at the time, if I heard a Backstreet Boys song that I really loved, that would probably upset my dad because that was not in his wheelhouse. But if my ears, because I always loved just taking in whatever I clicked with, that to me was my way of going rebelling. I had my taste for this other stuff that was outside of rock and roll that maybe wasn't for what my dad was into or whatever he had likened me to or whatever that was.
Gabe?
Yeah, I resonate with that a lot. For me, it was also, it was my mom and my dad had a lot of overlap in their musical tastes. Not completely, because my dad is still big into classical music, and that was always a no-go in our home. It was always shut down pretty quickly. But yeah, for me, it was long car rides listening to stuff like classic vinyl on Sirius XM, and listening to old Elton John and Billy Joel. And that was really, it became because from an early age I was very passionate about music. It became a big way of bonding with them, I would say. And so it was, oh, what's this song? What's that song? What was happening when this came out? Did you ever see this band live? It was a form of sort of connection. And also because I've always felt very connected to sort of those earlier ages of rock and roll, even though I wasn't born anywhere near them. Yeah, I think that it was introduced to me through the likes of, like I said, like Grateful Dead and Billy Joel and Green Day. And then it sort of just, I kind of took it and ran and discovered all these other avenues and paths that really I still listen to today.
It's funny because in my house, my mom was a pop and soul music listener. My dad was a rock and roll listener. And they like doo-wop music. But the thing in my house was introducing newer rock music to my father and not having him go, that's a piece of shit. And it's funny because bands that are now considered classic rock were young when I discovered them, played them for my dad, and he'd be like, that's what you don't know what you're talking about. Like, I remember when I first brought home a Heart record and I played Barracuda for him for the first time, and he was like, that's awful. Who wants to listen to that shit? Yeah, I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, if I want to hear that. And he would put on like Smoke on the Water by Deep Purple. If I played a Fleetwood Mac record, he would say, listen to Janis Joplin. And he'd put that on. It wasn't until it's very funny because the first contemporary rock record that my dad said, that's good. So random. It was Left of the Dial by the Replacements. Random, but he thought it was like the perfect combination of like Crosby, Stills and Nash, who were one of his favorites, and some of like the Dead and all of that stuff. I didn't see it, but I could play my Replacements records on the big stereo in the house, because in our house we had multiple stereos, because that's not, nobody in my family could play music. I don't know how to play anything, but we had multiple music players in our house. So there was like my dad's big system. He used to have we used to call them coffins, where you have like, it's like a big wooden thing, like this long rectangular case for, and it would have a TV in the front, and it would have a stereo, and then he would have the big giant quadraphonic speakers that he would plug into them. And then my sisters and I had our own record players until we both had our own cassette players. There was always something blasting in our house, and it was usually rock music. And but yeah, it would be a war over who had the good rock music. And my father, it's funny, in historically speaking, he won, A, because he was the father, and B, because it's hard to say that Jimi Hendrix sucks, or that, Janis Joplin sucks, or that, Smoke on the Water, which has probably the most iconic guitar riff in all of music history on it. Steppenwolf, I hated them, but he loved them. Just like, kind of, they were kind of like the metal bands of the day. Cream, Strange Brew, that kind of stuff. So let me ask you this. Who are your favorite rock bands or rock artists right this moment? And we're not including John Mayer because he's the patron saint of our show. Come on, Gabe.
John Mayer.
I just said no, John Mayer.
Yeah, I know. I think that there are a lot of bands that are really driving the rock vehicle pretty well. I still like what Coldplay is doing. I think that they've strayed a little more into the alternative and a little away from rock, but I still love what they're doing. We've talked about the Black Keys before. I think that they're really good. I think that there are a lot of bands that had potential to be this sort of 90s punk type of sound that just kind of fell off. Like, I thought that Imagine Dragons had potential, but then they kind of dropped a song and dipped, or dropped a couple songs and said, we're done. I don't know if I'm sure they'll come back eventually, but yeah, I think that those are the main ones that come to mind for me.
Those are the main ones. What about you, Max?
I'm a huge fan of the Struts, and that's probably because I see that Luke Spiller, their lead vocalist, is an absolute star, and I don't feel like we have a lot of stars out there in the rock genre right now. And I feel like to me, he lives it. You can feel it when you see he's got a presence to him. And my favorite band of all time is Queen. So to me, there's that immediate connection for me personally, where I can see the little Freddie Mercuryisms and what Luke Spiller is doing, but still doing his own thing with that. Also, a band called Wolf Alice.
Oh, yeah, I love Wolf Alice.
Again, a little bit more on the alternative, but again, to me, that's rock. What they're doing is rock. There's a guitarist, singer by the name of Aaron Jones, who's been out for a couple years or so right now, and I think he's someone to look out for. So those to me are the people that right now currently are doing it for me as far as moving that needle.
What about you, Larry? Who are some of the rock bands that are doing it for you now?
Well, I'm obsessed with Måneskin, the Italian band that won the Eurovision Song Contest 2 years ago. They're about to put out their first full English language record next year, and I can't wait because the singles leading up to it are insane. They're so good. And I also like a band that is being marketed as a country band, but to me, if they had come out 20, 30 years ago, they would be sold as a rock band, and that is the Brothers Osborne. In fact, they just put out the most blisteringly good version of It's Only Rock and Roll. It's John and TJ. TJ is the bass voiced kind of rhythm guitar playing guy. He's the lead singer. John Osborne is someone that you in particular should check out, because he is so good on guitar, and he's a master of like complex riffs that I think both of you would be really into. They have a bit of a country swing because they have to sell first to that market, because they could not be marketed as a rock band given the types of songs that they want to sing. But yeah, if they were signed around the time that Dave Matthews was signed, they'd be marketed as a rock act, with no question in my mind. And I think that's a very interesting layer. We talked about this earlier, that there are a lot of bands now that are going in different genres because they would not find a home on any kind of rock radio programming. because of, either being soft or too melodic or whichever. But one last question before we wrap this up. And it comes to mind because of what you said, Gabe. If a band starts to dabble in other genres, do they lose their rock credibility?
That's a tough question. I want to say no, because I think that a lot of rock and roll is about finding new avenues and exploring those. But I'd be lying if I said that there wasn't a part of me that felt like with his last Coldplay album, for example, that they were straying away a little bit from being a rock band and being more of a, I guess, alt rock band, which is fine. I think that there are bands that I view as sort of rock purists, like a Hendrix or Stevie Ray Vaughan or, Led Zeppelin or whoever it may be. And even earlier Coldplay. And I don't think they lose their rock status, but I think you have to start then making the distinctions album to album. I think that they're still a rock band, but I think that they can be a rock band not making rock albums, if that makes sense.
What about you, Max?
I think it's about the audience that artist has, because to me, there's certain bands, and also about the earnestness behind the change, because there's certain acts that perhaps at some point in time in history decided to make a change in sound out of desperation. It wasn't honest. It wasn't what they were about, really. They just did it because they figured maybe they could make more money and something else. But to me, the ones that did it earnestly, and again, it's about the audience, someone like U2, who, when they took that change from the Joshua Tree to Actung Baby in 91, very jarring, but it somehow clicked with everybody that heard it. And then you have someone like David Bowie, of course, famously changing album to album, but he stuck to his guns. Again, there was an honesty and a purity to that although people considered career suicide, somehow it worked itself out. Beatles, same story. Madonna, in a way, too. You listen to something like Erotica and then Ray of Light afterwards. But again, she stuck to her guns and making that that's what she was going to be from the start, really. So it worked out in her favor. But then you have bands like, say, Def Leppard, who had a certain pattern, and then they do something like Slang in 96, which is like their alt rock record. Earnest as it may have been to them, that their audience wasn't going to buy that. So to me, that's what factors in.
Yeah, it's funny because my first feeling was, no more credibility, because it does come down to which dragon are you chasing? Are you chasing the road of experimentation, or are you a commercial act? And I think what separates, say, U2 from Bon Jovi is one is undeniably corporate and one infiltrated the corporate world. U2 kind of were borderline punk band at the beginning that kind of just swerved and turned. Joshua Tree was actually quite the departure from October and from Boy. They were always a reinventive kind of unit, whereas Bon Jovi rode that horse until the legs gave out, and then they went to Stockholm and made a Swedish pop record, and oh well. And then suddenly, when that didn't work or didn't continue to work, suddenly not only did they go back to their corporate sound, John Bon Jovi developed a Southern accent.
Well, that's why
someone needs to explain that one to me.
That's why I love the Chili Peppers so much, because even they, all these years later, are finding a way to release music that sounds like it could have been made in the 90s, but they're not really trying to conform to sounds that are working today. They're still staying true to themselves, but doing it in a unique way. Larry, you brought up sort of experimentation versus kind of staying true to their own sound. And I think that the mark of a really good rock band is sort of being able to balance those two. And that's what I think the Chili Peppers have accomplished really well, is finding a way to use their sound. It still totally sounds like them. The new records sound like they could have come, like I said, could have come out, 20 years ago or so, but they're doing it in a way that does still sound fresh and that people are still enjoying.
But, it comes down to what you're saying there and what Max said earlier, which is, how have you established yourself? Have you established yourself, easy for me to say, as a musically curious band? Or have you played the same 4 riffs until people stopped buying? And then you thought, whoops, guess I better get a dance mix. Whoops, I better do an electronic thing. Then it's a different thing, right? Because let's face it, I love Def Leppard. I used to like Bon Jovi. But they're not musically curious bands. They were never musically curious bands. If you played each one of Bon Jovi's biggest records, they're basically set from 2 molds. The power ballad and the arena anthem. And some of them have the same chord progressions and the same melody lines. And so when you go and suddenly you come out with a Swedish pop record because your last album didn't sell as much, well then, okay, congratulations. It did all right for a minute. But, like I said earlier, there's nothing quite like this mysterious new accent that John Bon Jovi has. It's his Southern accent. John Bon Jovi's Southern accent.
Yeah, it came with the 5th facelift.
Well, but his accent is even better than Madonna's British accent. But nobody's calling him out on it because he's a dude. Because suddenly he's trying to sound like Bruce Springsteen. Baby, you're from like a shitty town in New Jersey. At least Springsteen has spent some time in the heartland. No, you can't go from no. Sorry. Sorry. So yeah, there you go. Final thoughts, anybody?
Well, I think the beauty of this kind of topic and the reason why we can discuss it over and over again is because there's no right answer, except our answers. But other than that, let us know what you think about sort of our definitions of rock, who's you relate to most. If it's none of us, let us know some alternate definition. But yeah, we'd love to hear from you. This was a lot of fun.
Exactly. So Max, any parting words?
I'll say this was a lot of fun. This completely made my week. I appreciate you guys for having me on. I love this topic. To me, it's a limitless topic. It's a battle that will rage on for eternity. So it's one for the books. Thank you guys for having me, really.
Thanks so much for being here.
It's an absolute pleasure. We'll certainly have Max Davallo back again very, very soon. In the meantime, when you're not listening to the comment section, check out Sonic Dorms wherever you listen to podcasts and look for the video version on YouTube. And you can find him on all the social media under Sonic Dorms. Is it Sonic Dorms or Sonic Dorms Podcast?
Sonic Dorms, and you'll find it right away. It's a great show, and he's a very, very, very good interviewer. So with that, we thank you for joining us. I'm Larry Flick.
I'm Gabe Scherzer.
We'll see you next time.